Thanksgiving. It's a time to reflect on yourself and your life. A time to acknowledge and give thanks for the many blessings that we all have in our lives, whether they be people or things. It's also a time to stuff your face full of food, which my at the time youngest brother Trey and I did plenty of. Every Thanksgiving, our family would travel down to the coast where my grandparents lived to spend a week together. Our trips were always time for laughter and fellowship and absolutely smashing food. Trey and I would eat and eat until we could barely stand, after which Trey would go play with his toys or take a nap, leaving me alone to my own devices. My grandparents' house was relatively small, which meant the little bit of space they had to go a long way. Because of this, my grandpa had all of his work things consolidated and nestled away in the corner of the kitchen. Among these was an old beige HP PC where my grandpa would check his emails and play solitaire when no one else was around to play the real game. So after meals at his house, I would clean up my spot at the table and kindly ask permission to use his PC. At the time, the PC to me seemed like such an obtuse way to play games. Our family PC back home had no games, and it wouldn't be until significantly later on in my life that I would finally find out about the MMO genre. Because of this, my first experiences with PC gaming were on my grandpa's PC. Now, being the simple-minded child that I was at the time, stuff like solitaire or Minesweepers seemed like the most boring possible use of my time. Instead, my grandpa had an application that was pre-installed onto his PC where I would go to have my fun. This application was called Wild Tangent Games. Wild Tangent Games was the simplistic virtual gaming store for PCs in the early to mid-2000s. Like something along the lines of Steam, but heavily scaled down to an almost bare-bones state. While quite a few of the games featured on the virtual store were made in-house by Wild Tangent themselves, the store also boasted an impressive number of games crafted by third-party studios. Now, as impressive as this was to me at the time, the caveat was that you had to pay to play these games. Luckily for Mini-Me, Tangent included a demo for almost all of the games available on their site at the time, which made it possible for me to get a taste of absolute classic bangers like Arcade Pinball and Polar Bear Bowling, only one of the greatest pieces of American media, period. Now, despite having those demos and more to play, I would always find myself eventually gravitating back to one specific game demo. A demo for a game called Fate. Fate is a retro-styled dungeon crawler modeled after some of gaming's greatest ARPGs like Diablo, as well as some forgotten titles like NetHack. It boasts a simple but addictive gameplay loop, whereas you find yourself in the role of a traveling adventurer, tasked with fighting your way down to the depths of a dungeon to claim fortune and glory for both yourself and your family. This was perfect for me at the time. Up until this point, my only real grasp on what a video game was or could be was Super Mario Land on the Game Boy, and those old plug-and-play games you used to be able to buy at Walmart for your TV. Fate opened my eyes to a whole new world of video game possibility I didn't even know was possible, which makes it even sadder to me that nowadays, Fate has been all but forgotten. While other games like Fate have gone on to have a much larger presence in the industry, Fate itself has been left behind, becoming nothing more than a distant memory of an ever-evolving industry. Well, that ends today. This is my retrospective on Fate, a forgotten classic. While Wild Tangent Games were primarily responsible for developing and publishing Fate, the genesis of the game can pretty much solely be contributed to the lead designer, programmer, producer, and art director, Travis Baldree. Now, Travis had long held an admiration for games like Diablo, and wished to leave his mark on the ARPG genre. This longing to create in this space would begin to take serious form several years prior to October 2004, where Travis would begin working on the foundation for what would eventually become Fate. One of the most important things for Travis going into the development of the game was that Fate needed to be accessible for anyone and everyone, while still presenting a fun and challenging experience to its players. This philosophy would go on to inspire every facet of Fate, from its warm and colorful visuals, to its core gameplay design and UI, and even the music. Now, not much else has been publicly stated about this time leading up to the official development start date, and unfortunately the same can be said for the actual development of Fate. Travis's team consisted of around 30 people, with 2/3 being comprised of artists and testers alone. Additional leadership roles were handed to a man named Marcus King, who acted as the lead tester on Fate, as well as Jay Min, who was the co-producer on the project and had a hand in creating many of Wild Tangent's other games, including the aforementioned Polar Bear Bowling. A development team this small, working on a project of Fate's caliber, was unheard of in the industry at the time. The same could be said for the game's actual development time, which lasted only for a whopping 5 months, with the game being completed in March of 2005. Wild Tangent wasted no time at all announcing the game after its completion. Shortly after, the game went into a brief beta where it was thoroughly play-tested to ensure it was as airtight of a product as possible. That way, when they showed it off at E3 later that year, it would knock the socks off of every single person that played it. A few months later, on May 18th, 2005, Fate was given an official release date, with certain game journalists at the event being allowed special access to the game. Travis himself was present to answer any questions, as well as give additional information for what to expect come release date. It was clear from these interviews that Travis and his team fostered an immense love for the game they had created, and were eagerly awaiting its full release. Fortunately for them, they wouldn't have to wait too long, as just a few weeks later, on June 30th, Fate would officially release on PC in North America. The game was a runaway success, being praised for its simple yet alluring gameplay loop, its colorfully enticing graphics, and most importantly, its price, coming in far below what its competitors were selling their newest dungeon crawler entries at. All of these elements created a gaming experience that captured the hearts of gamers young and old at the time. The game even saw some impressive critical acclaim from some of gaming's top reviewers at the time. Computer Games Magazine gave Fate the award for Best Role-Playing Game that year, with it also acting as the runner-up to their list of the top 10 best computer games that year. PC Gamer US also honored Fate by announcing it as both a finalist for their Best Role-Playing Game and Best Value Game of 2005, though Fate would lose both awards to Dungeon Siege 2 and Guild Wars respectively. Now then, with the development and reception out of the way, I think it's time we look for ourselves at what makes Fate such an enduring classic.
Since oldest living memory, the Dungeon Gate has stood in the heart of the old wood. Its doorway leads to infinite possibility, to subterranean lands fabled in stories and myths. Many adventurers have passed over that ancient threshold, some to find fame, glory, and wealth beyond telling, and others never to return. The town of Grove has ever been the safe haven at the dungeon's mouth, a watering hole and resting place for weary adventurers. Here, great tales are told by the inn's fire, journeys are planned, and legacies are made. The minstrels sing of the great feats of heroes long gone, and statues ring the square, a testament to their deeds. After traveling many hard and dusty days, you and your faithful companion arrive at last in the fabled forest town, which waits beneath the long shadow of the gate. Within these walls lies the path to infinite adventure. It is here that you will test your worth, and perhaps find fortune and glory along the way. It is here that you will determine your fate.
One of the big draws that many ARPGs possess is the ability to become lost in their respective worlds. One of the biggest ways developers accomplish this is by purposefully providing the player with a blank slate of a character. No backstory, no nothing. You're not meant to become invested in your character because of what the game lends to him or her. You're meant to become invested by what you bring to them, how you breathe life into your respective adventurer. It allows the player, regardless of who they may be, to fully embody the adventurer, from your character's name to the weapons you use. Every action you take, every adventure you embark on, is your own choosing. You get to create your own story. And yet, the little bit of story foundation that Fate does give us helps to set the stage quite well. The opening cutscene is narrated fantastically by an actor by the name of Henry Dardenne. Dardenne, while having only 12 voice acting credits attributed to his name in a span of 10 years, still found himself working on other major projects at the time, like Star Fox Assault, where he voiced Peppy, and Halo 2, where he voiced certain Space Marines. His contribution to Fate is a welcome one. Dardenne's voice helps to breathe life into what little bit of story setup were provided, readying the player for whatever adventures may lie ahead. As stated previously, you as the player oversee the making of your own story. Outside of being given a specific legacy-defining quest when you first create your character, you're given nothing more when you first load into the game. Now, while you could immediately hop into navigating the dungeon, a lot of the fighting and exploring would feel somewhat pointless for most of the game. That's where the Town of Grove comes into play. The Town of Grove acts as the game's hub world. Everything that you as an adventurer could ever want or need can be found here. A wide variety of armor and weapons, encouraging an array of different playstyles. Scrolls that teach you new powerful spells that range from shooting simple fireballs to casting healing spells over yourself and your furry companion. Books and scrolls that can be used to travel between the dungeon and the grove without losing your progress, as well as to identify mysterious weapons and armor that you may come across while you're down in the dungeon. You even have potions that do everything from replenishing health and stamina to curing poison. Even fish that can be fed to your trusty furry sidekick, resulting in various unique effects for your pets. Most of the time, the transformations are only temporary, but certain rare fish do carry the ability to permanently transform your traveling companion, resulting in some seriously powerful buffs to them. The Grove also hosts a powerful enchanter, who for a hefty price will attempt to enchant your gear with a powerful buff, or even create sockets on your weapon or armor that can be filled with special gems found out in dungeons, while fishing, or even from other vendors. While this does seem nice, the enchanter's services does come with a potential cost. On occasion, the enchanter will accidentally curse your gear, applying a crushing debuff to it, or even worse, rendering it completely useless. I guess you can say the enchanter is kind of like a box of chocolates. You never quite know what you're going to get. Additionally, the townspeople will also provide you with a plethora of quests. Now, admittedly, the missions all pretty much boil down to fetch quests. You'll be tasked with game-ending a monster boss on a specific level of the dungeon. Typically, they'll be carrying either a special weapon or piece of armor that somebody in the grove wants back. Once you complete the quest and slay the monster, you're given two options. Do you return the stolen item to its rightful owner back at the grove? Or do you prematurely end the quest and keep the item for yourself, while forfeiting gold and any potential fame points you may obtain from completing it? Personally, I almost always opted to complete my quests, as the fame mechanic to me was significantly more important to invest in. Now you may have noticed that I've mentioned fame a few times now in the video. That's because fame makes up one of the most vital gameplay aspects of Fate. You see, when you start the game off, you're pretty much a nobody, just some random pissant looking to make a name for yourself in the world. That quickly changes, however, as every time you complete a major action, like finishing a quest, you not only gain gold, but fame as well. Fame acts as an additional leveling system for your character, outside of the main one of course. It's the only way to gain additional skill points for your character, which can be used to improve a specific area of your adventurer, like critical hits with a physical weapon, or improve performance with a specific weapon like polearms or one-handed swords. Besides questing, you can also pay the local minstrel a visit to help with your fame level. For a hefty price, the minstrel will sing your praises to all who will listen, instantly increasing your fame level and allowing you more opportunities to gain fame and gold at an increased rate and amount. Fame also has a third use, but we'll get back to that later. Besides the fame system, you also have your typical RPG leveling system, where you can gain experience points, or XP for short, to level up your adventurer. Now, all of this is simple RPG stuff, which to some may come off as a bit of a disappointment. The thing is, Fate was never made with the intention of pushing the ARPG genre forward. It was always meant to just be a fun and familiar experience, sacrificing innovation for the tightest gameplay experience Travis's team could provide. Anyways, once you're ready to embark on your quest to explore, you'll head over to the imposing doors of the dungeon and descend into the depths below. Now, the game can really begin. When you first enter the dungeon, you're met with a chilling atmosphere. Damp stone walls surround your adventurer, while a thick fog hangs low on the ground. Small campfires litter the many levels of the dungeon, signs of evil lurking close by. Now, while these are all simple level design choices by themselves, when meshed, they create quite a mysterious and depressing atmosphere. Moving past aesthetics, every level of the dungeon is chock full of enemies, treasure, and other secrets just waiting to be found by your adventurer. When you first begin your dungeon crawling, you'll be faced with little adversity, encountering small enemies like rats, sentient balls of jello, gnomes, spiders, and goblins. As you continue to descend, however, that quickly changes. The dungeon will throw everything it has at you. Mimics, enemies who take the shape of treasure chests meant to catch you off guard. Yetis, vampires, huge boar-like creatures, and even dragons await you on the deeper levels. With these new enemies also comes a steep difficulty spike, requiring you to exercise every facet of combat the game provides you with to survive. Because of this difficulty spike, you're probably going to find yourself dying quite often in the earlier parts of your adventure. But instead of just getting a simple game over screen and being booted back out of the dungeon, you'll be presented with this instead.
Choose your fate.
The physical embodiment of fate itself comes to you, offering 3 paths forward. You can either forfeit fame points and XP to be revived right there on the spot, give up a sizable amount of gold and be sent back up a level, or be revived 3 floors up, but leave all of your gold in the spot where you last died. There's not much else to the death system, but it's still an interesting alternative to simply being shown a generic game over screen. Plus, the eerie vibes here are unmatched. Besides the enemies, you'll find a plethora of secrets and treasures untold scattered all throughout the dungeon. Crates and urns littered throughout the dungeon will sometimes hold gold, jewels, or on occasion, even deadly traps, while weapon racks can be raided for the chance of magical or socketed items. Special fishing spots can sometimes be found as well, allowing you to fish for extra special fish and gems for your adventurer and their pets. Even things like magical anvils may appear on the level, allowing you a chance to enchant an item without paying the fee back at the Grove. That leads us to the game's final major gameplay mechanic. Once you finally descend to the floor of the dungeon, where the dungeon boss presides, you will be faced with the most difficult battle the dungeon is capable of throwing at you. On completing your quest and slaying this boss, you can return to the Grove and, in turn, your main quest, being provided with gold, jewels, and fame beyond your belief. It's at this point that the game gives you 2 options. You can either continue to descend the dungeon, picking up minor quests from the Grove's inhabitants until the end of time, or you can retire your adventurer. Now, retiring your adventurer sees them do just that, retire. They'll live in peace and comfort for the rest of their life, until one day they finally pass on, and allowing their next of kin to continue their legacy as an adventurer. You'll return to the Grove as the offspring of your original adventurer with a new furry companion in tow, desperate to make a name for themselves like their family before them. All your gold, gear, and stats will be reset, but instead of the piddly starter axe your previous adventurer had at the beginning of their quest, you'll be granted your previous adventurer's weapon, now with insanely buff stats. From this point on, every time you complete an adventurer's main quest and retire them, the next of kin will receive that weapon in an even more powerful state than it was before. If you ask me, I think that's a worthwhile exchange. Before we wrap this video up, I wanted to take a moment to address one other aspect of Fate that, in my opinion, elevates the game to the level that I believe it to be. That aspect is Fate's music. The score for Fate takes inspiration from two main genres of music, that of traditional Irish, as well as Western classic. This is best showcased, in my opinion, through the music piece entitled Captain O'Kane, The Clergy's Lamentation. This piece acts as the game's main theme. What I like about it is it embodies all of the characteristics that I adore about Fate. The mystery, the intrigue, the lust for new lands and adventures not yet told. Besides this piece, the game features two more Celtic-inspired pieces that will play in the Grove while resting up to brave the dungeon below. Those pieces being a second rendition of the Clergy's Lamentation featuring the artist Sue Richards, as well as a second piece titled Good Morning to Your Nightcap, Behind the Haystack. The game also features a minuscule but effective original score for the dungeons. 3 pieces, titled Dungeon 1, 2, and 3, help to further encapsulate the atmosphere I described above. These pieces were composed by the game's sound engineer, Mark Possipil, as well as Travis Baltrey himself, adding yet another major contribution to the game's development. Here's a little bit from my favorite out of the 3 of them, entitled Dungeon 3. While Fate may not have evolved into a worldwide phenomenon like other similar games, its legacy lives on within its small but passionate fan base. The game boasts an active modding community, bringing in new items, enemies, quests, and more to a game already tailored towards replayability. Back in July of 2022, Wild Tangent released official merchandise for the game in the form of a plush of Fate itself. The following year, in 2023, they would release another plush, this time based off the Mimic enemy from the game. Most exciting of all, during the production of this video, a studio owned by Wild Tangent by the name of Gaming Go US announced that it had been working on a remaster of all 4 of the original Fate games. The new release is set to feature a higher poly count, real-time directional lighting, ambient occlusion, additional languages with full localized voiceover, and more that's yet to be announced. My brother and I are both very blessed to have the childhood that we did, but even still it wasn't perfect. Our family dealt with many hardships that would eventually lead to our parents filing for divorce. There were very rough periods of time growing up, but every time I got the chance to play Fate, all those worries would seamlessly melt away. I feel very lucky to be able to play the game today in any capacity, so the fact that we're about to get a new remaster of all 4 of the games brings me immense joy for myself, the rest of the fan base, and especially to people who will be newly introduced to the series through this release. My only hope is that the game does for them what it's done for me all these years. The future of this series looks brighter than it ever has before. This is Fate, a classic forgotten no longer.